Hell in the Land of the Morning Calm, Chapter 18, Heavenly Transportation. I remember being up on a high mountain and looking down and seeing troops all up and down the river below me. I recognized it as the Yalu River, the river separating Manchuria from North Korea. I knew that there were only two main roads going north and south that far up in North Korea. They would be covered by troops, and there was no chance for me to get through on the roads. I remember thinking, how in the world am I going to get across that river? On the other side of the river, there was a high mountain range. Those mountains were something like the ones out in Arizona and New Mexico that are almost straight up and down, hard to get over, and with very little vegetation on them. I thought, after I get over the river, I have that big mountain range to cross. That's really going to be a job, even if I make it across the river. The next thing I knew, I was not only across that river, but I was across the mountain range. I'm not saying how God did it because I don't know. God might have picked me up like he did Philip when he picked him up in the desert and set him down in Azotus. I don't know. Somebody once asked me, if he did that, then why didn't he just take you on down and set you down behind the American lines? I don't question God as to what he does. I think he was building inside this old country boy an immovable faith in God that nothing would be able to shake. Miracle of miracles. I came all the way out of Manchuria, all the way down through communist North Korea to the American lines. As far as I know, I was never spotted one time. One morning, as I was getting ready to look for a place to hide for the day, I heard a sound that was music to my ears. It was those old 155 millimeter howitzers firing. I sat down on the ground and wept. I knew they were Americans and American guns. For the first time, I took off in the daylight because I didn't want to try to go through the American lines at night. What I didn't think of at first was that I had the enemy lines to go through too. I was getting to the front lines of both armies, and this would be the most difficult part of all. I was walking along cautiously, trying to see if I could see anything. I didn't see anybody. Suddenly, it felt as though I had stepped on something slick and my feet flew out from under me. Then I heard the crack of the rifle. The bullet hit me before I heard the sound. When I heard it, I knew it was an American M1 rifle. I rolled quickly over into a ditch and thought, that really doesn't mean anything. They've captured a lot of our equipment. It could be a Chinaman or a North Korean. But then I saw him, an American soldier. You talk about trying to think of something to get them off my back. I was desperate because in my mind I could see a grenade coming in on top of me next. I started yelling at them. Finally, they yelled back at me. The fact that I was speaking English meant little because a lot of Chinese spoke English and there were a lot of Russian agents that spoke English. I had on that old quilted Chinese uniform and the Americans had no patrols out. So, as far as the soldiers were concerned, there was no reason for any Americans to be out there. "Aw, come on now," I called out. "You never heard a Chinaman speak with a North Carolina accent." That did it. "All right," I heard another deep southern voice say. "You come out of there with your hands up on top of your head, and if you move, you're dead." It turned out the speaker was from Louisiana. They wanted to carry me on in, and believe me, I looked as though I needed to be carried. I was just skin stretched over bone, and my eyes were sunk back into my head until you could hardly see them. But I wanted to walk in. Now, I want you to see another tremendous thing God did in all of this. For months and months before I was captured, I had witnessed and held services in my regiment and tried to be a light to those guys. When I came back into the American lines, it was to my own regiment. One of the first guys I saw knew me personally. As I was approaching our battalion command post, I saw our first sergeant standing out in front of this old mud hut. He was the he was one of the ones who had jumped on the jeep, driven through the enemy troops, and escaped when I was captured. He told me later he thought that he recognized my walk. When he was sure it was me, he yelled for the commanding officer. When he came out, the commanding officer slapped the first sergeant on the back, almost knocking him off his feet. I told you that fellow would show up, he said to the sergeant. They knew that somehow, in some special way, God was with me. They had seen it before. Now they knew it beyond a shadow of a doubt. That sergeant walked up to me. Big tears came up in his eyes. And he said, "My Lord, man, you're not even human." Yes, I am just as human as anybody else. I just serve a great big God. Boy, I believe it. I sure believe it. The army shipped me back to Japan where they fattened me up a little and gave me time to recover from the bullet wound. They didn't want to send me home in the condition I was in. I was hospitalized there for a while and questioned thoroughly by our intelligence officers. They just couldn't understand how I'd covered so much territory in so short a time. Yet they knew I had been where I said I'd been because I described places and things that they knew about and knew I had no way of knowing about except to have been there. They finally sent me back to the States. They had a lot of actresses, a big band, and some dignitaries there to meet the plane. I walked down the steps of the plane, took about a dozen steps from the plane, and stopped and looked down at the crowd. I said, "I'm home." I'm actually home. Suddenly, everything began to spin, and I fell into a heap. They picked me up and rushed me to the hospital. For several days, I lay between life and death in a coma. While in the communist camp, I had held everything in. Then there had been that long, grueling period of getting back. I had not gradually adjusted to normal life again. My emotions, held in all this time, suddenly turned loose. I went into a state of shock. When I recovered, they sent me home for a few days, then on to Fort Stewart, Georgia, for the remainder of my service time. End of chapter 18.